I mean, it really is the most important news, isn't it, guys? That Nikita Gusev is released from his PTO. Who cares?
What do you want me to say, man?
I'm sorry,
I don't
Alex.
know.
I know you were hoping for him to find a spot,
I
be
mean,
the
like,
guy on the left side, but it's okay.
oh, that's going to the greatest of all time, Michael Bunting.
I
No.
kept forgetting that Gusev was a thing. By the way, when I saw he got released, I thought, "Oh,
I mean,
nice to see that you're here."
there was hope there, right? Because it was a somewhat, I guess you'd consider him more of a skilled guy than anything else, and
Yeah.
there's literally 4 spots open on the left side. So if you can fill one of those up, go right ahead. It's unfortunate it didn't work. What I was reading online, a lot of these guys were saying he just wasn't noticeable. Like he didn't stand out compared to the other guys who are competing for those positions. And I mean, look at Josh Hosang. Guy got himself an AHL deal, right? That's what you're competing up against.
Richie had a pair last night. Bunting had a hat trick. Kasha's scored. Camp has gotten up. He's a center, but still, he's been at least doing something.
Right.
Mikheyev scored a goal. Gusev, literally everything that he could have done, he just chose not to do. And you mentioned another guy there, Alex. Hosang doesn't make the team, but because of some shenanigans, what might be happening with 50-player contracts, is that's he works out for the Leafs, and that is Josh Hosang signing an AHL contract with the Marlies. Yeah, fair. Good for him. It's nice to see. Hopefully he can just stay there and get some stability in his career for a year or however long they sort of look to have him there.
Yeah, I mean, look at what and this was in a much shorter time span, but the Leafs did something in a similar manner with Alex Galchenyuk last year, right? Sending him down and I would say helping him regroup. He'd started the year with the Senators, got traded to the Hurricanes, and then to the Leafs. That's not an easy thing to deal with, and especially like a span of how many months. It couldn't have been more than 3. So I think him playing in the AHL allows him to regroup, just because it hasn't been the easiest last few years for Josh Hosang. He has been stuck in the AHL with the Islanders, and it seemed, and the other stuff going on, it just seemed a bit messy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I remember there was those big stretches where he would be called up, but he wouldn't play. He would be like a healthy scratch for 8-9 games, and then he'd be sent back to Bridgeport.
Yeah. Just what's the point? What are we doing with this player? It makes no sense. And he goes overseas, seems to figuring himself out, comes to camp in a great attitude, and then it feels like if anything that's kind of been squashed this training camp for Hosang, it's been the rumors about maybe him having an attitude about him. That has seemed like very far from the truth. So that's been really, really nice to see, to be honest with you guys. Out of anything, I think that's probably been like the feel-good story of camp so far for the Leafs, at least. It's been Josh Hosang. So
Right.
I think some would say that you love to see it, right?
Yes, yes, you would.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Staying on the whole left side of things, is it now a given that watching that game, before last night's game between Toronto and Montreal, I kept thinking to myself, for the Toronto side of things, I just don't get the idea. Like I couldn't think of anyone else except Michael Bunting on that top line. But then Richie scores a pair in the preseason. Yeah, it's preseason, but I think they mentioned on the broadcast, he did something very simple. He went to the front of the net and he deflected the Marner shot, and that's all you need to do on that line.
Yeah, and I think the thing with the playing in the top 6 for the Leafs is you're going to be the worst player on that line. Like, it's just the reality. You're not going to be better than Matthews or Marner, and you're not going to be better than Tavares or Nylander. It's just the cap constraints and the reality of this team. Like, to say, like, some things on Twitter are ridiculous, but the job you have when you're playing on either of those lines is very simple. Like, it's get the puck to one of the other guys, essentially, and then plant your ass in front of the net. And if it hits you, goes in, or if you're there for the rebound, is exactly what you want.
Which
Go.
Twitter hot takes are you looking at? Because for me, I am on board of the 30-30 for Mike Bunting.
I'm again also on board for that, as I tweeted in his first preseason game, and when he scored a goal, he will be a 30 goal scorer. I definitely believe that. No, I just think there's a lot of things being taken out of context because it's preseason. I don't think any of these guys who they currently have are gonna stand out the same way that a Zach Hyman did. But what we're forgetting is the Leafs developed Zach Hyman into what Zach Hyman is, along with the help that this is the guy he wants to be. They traded him for him years ago. He played in the AHL and then was brought into the NHL and essentially he got himself a nice contract. I think it was around $35 million, $40 million. Like that, that's not what the guys they brought in are going to do. They're going to be Hyman light. Hyman light. Nick Ritchie is going, like we've talked about Nick Ritchie. He's not going to be Zach Hyman. Neither is Michael Bunting. Let's set the let's be realistic.
What's unique about Hyman too, and you can look back at a lot of names, is in his time in the AHL, it was his head coach. Pretty sure it was young Sheldon Keefe, wasn't it?
Yes.
And then you also look at the guys around that system he would have come up with, and it's Nylander, and now the rest of these guys have been past lease due to cap casualty, but it was guys they developed like Janssen, like Kapanen, and now Kapanen obviously was drafted by another team, but he spent time in the AHL with Toronto. So they always say that you can tell how well put together a franchise is, not just your NHL team, but your AHL too. Is that if the method of play transitions, like if you play the same way you do in the NHL and the AHL, it's much easier for those prospects to know that that next man up thing of this is the role I need to play. And luckily for Hyman, there was that sort of weird transition. What's going on with Babcock? How long until Keefe actually gets the role here? But still, the thing with Hyman is he got his play style done so quickly. He knew exactly what he needed to do. And again, you saw that with it was going back to All or Nothing. It was the big thing of VC. What the hell are you? That's the worst thing, not just with a team's identity, but a player. It's what are you in what role? And Hyman was perfect for that. And now, in the position the Leafs are in, they have to find those diamonds in the rough that can fill that role. And hell, if Nick Ritchie can have a goal or something not every other game, he's not going to spot 40, but if he can get 15 on that top line, best case scenario, really. I don't think that's too crazy to ask either, not to mention even if it's anyone else going up there, because I think it's far from set he'll be there the entire season because they're going to see what works. But yeah, Hyman just... By the way, what a great story too. Sorry, the Panthers fans, but
yeah, I think going into the season, it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be that this is the lineup they're going with the entire season. And I get the preseason and anything, and I'd have to imagine that Keefe would also agree in that the regular season is different than the preseason, right? The guys you are going up against, it's different. It's clearly different. So if it doesn't work, then you have other options that you can try. If none of them work, then now we're having a different conversation. But I don't want to get too far ahead in the conversation of none of these guys are Hyman, because in reality, there's a very good chance that none of these guys are Zach Hyman.
You want to know something I was reading? It was an Arpin Basu article. I'm going to mention him again a little later when we talk about the Habs, but he had this really, really interesting... He kind of broke down the way that Dominic Ducharme sort of breaks down the season. And it's the first third, the second third, the stretch to the playoffs, and then the playoffs themselves. And how, obviously, the longer the season goes, the tighter the games get. And, if you look at a player, their numbers are going to be different no matter what in certain situations, and sort of how the pressure goes up for certain times of the year. So a guy may work for that first third of the season. Another guy may actually end up working there to get the guy at the deadline who fits in, and boom, he's going to be the guy in the playoffs. You never know, right? You never know.
I like to
Shall
go on
we
the
move?
Richie part though, by the way. Sorry. I
Sorry?
just want to mention one thing about Nick
Yeah,
Richie
yeah.
when we mentioned about him and the way he's been playing. And I think what you guys talked about, I think it fits with him so well. Because we've talked a lot about Michael Bunting, but with Nick Richie, it's just been he had to reinvent himself. And I think he was on that cusp of becoming that with Boston. That's why I was surprised that he was not given a qualifying offer or at least a contract extension with the Bruins because the best thing that happened to him, even though I loved him on Anaheim, was get traded from the Ducks because there is no way that he was going to pan out into what they were expecting him to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes to Boston, and it's like just yeah, I'm just using a wrestling reference here, but he had to know his role.
He had to lie down for the three.
Yes, and right now, I think that he is where he has to be. Like that trajectory is still there and that productivity is still there because we've spoken so much about his game. We've spoken about what he's been doing with Boston, what he's been able to do even the playoffs where we saw like, there were those early on miscues that we expected from a Nick Ritchie that we even saw in juniors, like, stop taking the bad penalties. Stop trying to just use your size as an advantage everywhere. And I think that he settled in a bit more into playing a bit more of that skill that he does have and just try to fit where he can now. So that's why I'm kind of excited about that one. No really bias there because, he's a great real junior guy too. He was a Ducks prospect, but I think with Nick Ritchie, what you get with him is a guy that like, he's about to become like that productive guy.
Would it be fair to say that the expectations for Nick Ritchie were to be somewhat of a Tom Wilson who can put up 40 points a year and also beat the crap out of people?
It's like how a decade it was like, who's going to be the next Char? Now everyone's trying to find the next Tom Wilson.
Right. Like in Anaheim, do you think that's what the expectation was, especially being 10th overall?
Yeah, I think it was. There was that expectation, and now it's just let him play his game. Just let him be what he needs to be, and I think that it fits perfectly wherever he goes. Before we move on, one interesting thing is like we never really spoke too much about it, and I know he's been really quiet, and we don't really know what's going on with anything with it. But like Andre Kasha is someone that I'm like, let's see where that goes.
He just needs to stay healthy.
Yeah.
That's so. I've actually a lot of guys on Twitter that I trust have said that Kasha does actually look good, and they're actually pairing him on a third line. A lot of people in their line predictions are putting him on a somewhat of a shutdown third line with Kampf and Mikheyev, and I wouldn't necessarily mind that. Because one thing that I believe Keefe has been looking for, and I think, Justin Bourne has brought this up multiple times. And remember, Justin Bourne worked alongside Sheldon Keefe with the Marlies. So he might be looking for a third line, like a shutdown third line. And he never really had that. And I think he was looking for that, and he thought Hyman was the perfect left wing, which is why they tried him on the third line and never found anything. But I wonder if that's something they do. Not that Kasha is necessarily a defensive specialist, but it's an option at least out there.